Hello, I'm Larry Wilson. Please join me as we continue this seminar highlighting the prophetic importance of 1798, 1844, and 1994. This is part 2 of 6. In our previous study, we considered a concept called the heaven-earth linkage law. God has linked certain events in heaven with events on earth so that we can determine our chronological position within His plan. You remember seeing this little crude diagram that when a certain prophetic event happens on earth that is connected to an event in heaven, we can tell that this event in heaven has transpired because the corresponding event on earth has taken place. This is true historically, and it's also true going forward into the future. And so here is the chronological progression of time, and here are prophetic events on earth, and they are linked to events in heaven, and this produces the heaven-earth linkage law. We also examined the vision of the metal man in Daniel 2 for 2 reasons. First, it is important to understand that the vision in Daniel 2 has been chronologically unfolding for the past 26 centuries. Thus far, we are living in the time of the feet, which represents the kingdom of Europe and parts of northern Africa. If you recall, the vision in Daniel 2 started with a head of gold, which represented the kingdom of Babylon. Then there was the chest of silver, which represented the kingdoms of the Medes and Persians. And then you remember the thighs of brass, which represented the Grecian Empire, the legs of iron, representing the 4th empire on earth, Rome, and then the feet, representing the kingdom, the nations of Europe and northern Africa. And then we come to the time of the toes, the 10 toes, and these represent the 10 kings that are yet future, that Revelation 17 speaks about. And these, during the time of these kings, Jesus will appear and set up His kingdom. We also examined Daniel 2 for a second reason. The vision of the metal man has been geographically expanding for the past 26 centuries, and of course, it is not yet finished. If you recall, I spoke about the archery target and how that the kingdom of Babylon, being in the center, represented the first kingdom in this metal man vision. And Babylon, about at that time, was about the size of the state of California. And then Medo-Persia swallowed up Babylon. Grecia then came along. Rome came along and then swallowed up Grecia and Medo-Persia and the territory that once was Babylon. And then Europe came along and swallowed up all of the previous kingdoms. And then at the end of the age, when we come to the time of the 10 kings, the whole world is included. So we start with a territory the size of Babylon, but we continue with expansion until the whole world becomes included. As I said, the feet of the metal man represent the 10 nations of Europe and northern Africa, which brought down the Roman Empire by AD 476. The kingdom of the feet is made up of some strong nations represented by iron, and some weak nations represented by clay. And it is by divine decree that the strong have never been able to eliminate the weak. The kingdom of the feet has been around for 1,539 years thus far, and it will continue until the kingdom of the toes is given authority over it. So looking at the years of the metal man, we see that the head, the chest, the thighs, the legs represent from the time of the vision to the end of the Roman Empire, 1,000 81 years. The feet thus far represent 1,539 years, and then at a point in the future, the toes of the image represent a period of about 9 months, as I understand it, and then the rock comes out of the sky and destroys the kingdoms of men. There are 17 apocalyptic prophecies in the books of Daniel and Revelation, and each prophecy brings a valuable contribution to the big picture. No prophecy stands alone. Now, watch how this unfolds. Each prophecy is tightly integrated and connected to the others, and they must not be separated from each other. So, looking at Daniel 2, we've just noticed the head, the chest, the thighs, the legs, the feet, the toes, the rock. We've noticed the time period given. But Daniel 7 does the same thing, but Daniel 7 picks up on the time period of the feet and adds considerable detail that would not be known if all there was to the story was Daniel 2. So here in Daniel 7, God repeats the same prophecy, but he uses 4 beasts: a lion, a bear, a leopard, and a monster beast having 10 horns. And then you know the story, how out of the monster beast a little horn grew up, and in so doing it plucks up 3 of the original 10. And we're going to learn in today's study that also during the time period of the feet, there's a judgment process. There's a court that convenes in heaven, and the books are open to investigate the behavior of mankind. God is judging mankind prior to the return of Christ. We also will find in Daniel 7, the little horn power is given authority to persecute the saints of God for 1,260 miserable years. And then the little horn suffers a major setback, but the Bible indicates it will recover. And this recovery will occur just shortly before Jesus returns and destroys the kingdoms of men. So what I'm trying to help you understand is that what God said in Daniel 2 and what God has spoken in Daniel 7, there's repetition and enlargement. God takes the period of the feet, which is 1,539 years thus far, and he breaks down that time period with more information about things that are going on. You'll see this as this study progresses. Daniel 7 provides new information about events that take place in heaven and on earth during the kingdom of the feet and toes, and to save time, we are going to start with the 4th kingdom of Rome. I'm not going to explain the first 3 beasts in Daniel 7. I've done that elsewhere. Starting with Daniel 7:7, Daniel writes, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast," which represents the Roman Empire, "terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth." The armies of Rome were the first to be known for the extensive use of iron. This monster beast had iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts in that Rome carried out a scorched earth policy. This means Rome did not see its enemies as having any value, and it destroyed them utterly. Whereas the kingdoms prior to Rome, they recognized that if they could destroy the rebellion, that they could train leaders and develop the territory that they conquered, and this territory would produce taxes and revenue for the kingdom. But Rome was different. Rome followed a scorched earth policy, and it destroyed whatever rebelled against its authority. And this monster beast had 10 horns. Verse 8, while I was thinking about the 10 horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This 8th horn, now I'm calling it the 8th horn because 10 minus 3 equals 7, so this becomes the 8th horn. The 8th horn had eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. Meaning this king had insight and arrogance. He saw things others couldn't see, and he said things others couldn't say. We'll talk more about that later. Verse 9, suddenly Daniel's gaze is turned into heaven, and he writes, as I looked into heaven, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels, that is, the hosts of angels that were circling the throne, were all ablaze. Verse 10, a river of fire, that would be a stream or a host of angels, that was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. Notice what is happening in heaven. The court was seated, and the books were opened. Now, let's go to verse 11, and then Daniel's gaze is redirected back to earth. Then, back on earth, he says, I continued to watch because of the boastful words the 8th horn was speaking. I kept looking until the 4th beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. Then in verse 12 he adds, the other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. What does this vision mean? Number 1, the Roman Empire fell because the 10 horns took away its authority. And about 50 years later, Justinian attempted to unify and revive the old Roman Empire by requiring everyone to be or become a Christian. And to determine who was and who was not a Christian, he appointed the Pope as the authority on this matter. This development explains how a new authority, having eyes and a mouth, the little horn in Daniel 7, rose up and became very powerful. As the little horn rose to power, it uprooted 3 of the original 10 horns. A number of historians agree the 10 horns responsible for the fall of Rome were the Ostrogoths, Heruli, the Franks, the Vandals, the Lombards, the Visigoths, the Suevi, the Burgundians, the Alemanni, and the Anglo-Saxons. 3 of these tribal nations were eventually uprooted, the Ostrogoths, the Heruli, and the Vandals, because of a religious disagreement with the Pope over the nature and deity of Jesus. By 538, these 3 kingdoms, the Ostrogoths, the Heruli, and the Vandals, who were enemies of the Pope, had been badly defeated, and they eventually disappeared or were uprooted as tribal nations. Okay, let's go back to the Bible. Daniel 7:23. He, Gabriel, gave me this explanation. The 4th beast is a 4th kingdom that will appear on earth. Remember, Daniel is living in Babylon, and the count of 4 kingdoms began with Babylon, so this makes the 4th kingdom Rome. This kingdom, Gabriel says, it will be different from all the other kingdoms because of its scorched earth policy, and it will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. Verse 24, the 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. After them, another king will arise, different from the earlier ones, and he will subdue 3 kings. Verse 25, the little horn, he will speak against the Most High, and oppress his saints, and try to change the set times, that is, God's 7th-day rest, and the laws, that is, the commandments of God. The saints will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time, which equals 1,260 years. And if you recall in our study on the Jubilee calendar, you know that a time is counted as 1 solar year of 360 days. So a time, 2 times would be 720, and half a time would be 180, for a total of 1,260 day years. Verse 26, but the court will sit in heaven, and the little horn's power will be taken away on earth, and at the appointed time the little horn will be completely destroyed forever. Did you notice the operation of the heaven-earth linkage law? When the power of the papacy over Europe is broken on earth, this indicates the court in heaven has convened. Verse 26, notice, but the court will sit in heaven, and his power, the little horn's power, will be taken away on earth. The heaven-earth linkage law is at work. History says the Pope was taken captive in February 1798, and this well-documented event is directly linked to a great convocation in heaven. The heaven-earth linkage law is very important. Let's go back to the Bible, and we'll show you why. In verse 21, the Bible reads, as I watched, Daniel says, this horn, this little horn, with the eyes and the mouth, was waging war against the saints and defeating them until, verse 22, until the Ancient of Days came and took his seat in court and pronounced judgment in favor of the saints of the Most High. In other words, the Father issued a restraining order against the little horn in 1798, and this is what brought the power of the little horn to an end, the 1,260 years that it had been given to wear out and make war against the saints. And verse 22 goes on to say, and later on the little horn will recover and persecute the saints a second time, until the time comes when the saints will possess the kingdom that Jesus is going to set up for them. Okay, here are 3 points I want you to consider. Number 1, the time period for the feet on the metal man has lasted 1,539 years thus far, but 1,260 years of the feet were allotted to the little horn in Daniel 7, and history tells us the 1,260 years ended in 1798. Therefore, math says the power of the papacy had to begin in 538, and it did. It was by 538 that the Ostrogoths, the Heruli, and the Vandals had been overthrown, and the Pope could begin to function as Justinian wanted him to function. Number 2, because the fourth beast in Daniel 7 is the Roman Empire, and because the 10 horns that broke up the Roman Empire were part of the Roman Empire, and because the little horn rose up out of the fourth beast and uprooted 3 of the 10 horns in the process, and because history says the Roman Catholic Church was given authority by Justinian to exercise temporal authority over Europe for 1260 years. Now, Justinian didn't give them a decree for 1260 years, but it turns out that once the church was given this authority, it held on to it, even though kings came and went, even though tribal nations changed their borders, the church remained. And for 1260 long years, also called the Dark Ages, the church persecuted the saints of God. And because the heaven-earth linkage law intimately connects the end of papal authority over Europe with the Ancient of Days sitting in court in heaven and pronouncing a restraining order in favor of the saints, bingo! We can firmly align an event on earth with an event in heaven using a widely accepted historical date. History simply says General Berthier marched unopposed into Rome on February 10, 1798. Pope Pius VI was arrested because he would not relinquish his authority over France. The Pope was removed from the Vatican and exiled to Certosa near Florence. Later, he was taken to Valence, where he died August 29, 1799. Number 3, the Bible speaks. Gabriel told Daniel, the 10 horns are 10 kings who will come out of this monster beast, the fourth kingdom, and they will break it apart. After them, another king will arise, different from the earlier ones, and he will subdue 3 kings, the Ostrogoths, the Heruli, the Vandals. And sure enough, as I watched, Daniel says, this horn was waging war against the saints and defeating them until the Ancient of Days came and took his seat in heaven's court and pronounced judgment in favor of the saints of the Most High. Finally, in verse 25, that Gabriel said to Daniel, the little horn will speak against the Most High and oppress his saints and try. He will not succeed, but he will try to change the set times and the laws of the Most High. The saints will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time. This has all been fulfilled, prophetically fulfilled. History and Bible prophecy perfectly align. But the court will sit, and his power will be taken away. Sure enough, at 1798, through General Berthier, the Ancient of Days brought 1260 years of religious persecution to an end. You may be wondering, okay, what does February 1798 have to do with Jesus being found worthy to receive the book sealed with 7 seals? Remember, that's the point we're going for. I want to show you the prophetic significance of 1798. I'm not talking about the historical significance, which is great, which is important, but I want to point you forward from 1798 going forward. Several important things in heaven are underway. Please consider this. Something else happened in heaven in February 1798 that few people appreciate. Verse 13, Daniel writes, In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. Daniel saw Jesus, attended by a large host of angels, and he approached the Ancient of Days, the Father, who was seated on his throne and was led into his presence. Now watch verse 14 carefully. Jesus was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. Sovereign power. That means all power. I'll talk more about that in the next segment, but I just want you to see it here in blue and black. Jesus was given authority, glory, and sovereign power in 1798, and all peoples, nations, and men of every language will worship him in days to come. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Daniel was given this vision way back in the 6th century BC. He was zoomed forward in time to 1798 to see heaven's court convene in 1798. Daniel was shown that after 1,260 years of persecuting God's saints, he saw the Father put a restraining order on the power of the papacy, and this restraining order is temporary. The papacy is recovering from its deadly wound, and we'll see that later in another study. But the point that you cannot miss, and I want you to see, is that Daniel also saw Jesus given sovereign power and a kingdom. In 1798, Jesus is given these two things because he did not have them. Jesus did not have sovereign power and a kingdom until 1798. Because of the heaven-earth linkage law, these three things took place in 1798. So the big question is this: what happened? Why was Jesus given sovereign power and a kingdom in 1798? We'll examine this highly important topic in our next segment. Well, I've run out of time once again. Please bookmark and share this video with your friends and proceed to the next segment.